Good evening, everyone, from wherever you are joining us. For those who don't know, I left St. Francis College in 2002, which was just a few years ago. Don't be counting. I had a wonderful time at St. Francis College. I was a bright-eyed kid from Trinidad and Tobago. I studied psychology at St. Francis College, and that's the place that gave me a solid education. And it is a space in which I cut my leadership skills and where I found an entrepreneurial spirit. So I'm not a traditional business owner in that sense, but I was able to find a space to flourish and to have creative ideas at St. Francis College. It's truly the small college of big dreams, and it means a lot to me to be back here having this conversation, albeit that we're online. I am grateful to SSC Innovate for having this conversation. It has given me excuse to put on some clothes. I haven't worn clothes like this in like 3-4 months. So I'm really overjoyed. I didn't leave the house, but I'm all dressed up. So, you know, and I'm grateful for the 6 panelists who are here today. We will make this conversational style. I've sent them the questions in advance for full disclosure, but we can switch it up however we want as we go along. Okay, before we dive in, I just want to ask the panelists, how are you feeling in this moment? Like, how are you feeling physically, psychically, spiritually? How are you in this moment? How are you navigating?
I guess I can start. Other than rushing out of the office, trying to not rush a patient and trying to drive a few blocks, which takes so much longer. I live in Harlem, so it's like not even 10 blocks, and it takes like 15 minutes to get back home. I think I feel good. I feel tired, but I'm hopeful. I love my job. I love my patients. I mean, like you said, I haven't gone anywhere else but to go to the to work. And in the beginning I was just in the hospital, and I was like, I miss my patients. So I think having people to have conversations with has really given me joy and hope, and also helped me to feel appreciated and realize like purpose, and giving me drive to keep going.
I'll go next. Thank you for asking that question. Thanks for checking in. We often don't check in on one another, especially when we're going through difficult times and we're navigating. I'm feeling good. I'm feeling optimistic. I think this is an opportunity in time where some really important things can happen institutionally and systemically. At the beginning of this pandemic, it was a bit of a transition, I think, for us all in our lives. And during that time, a lot of us got the opportunity to reflect and think about a pathway forward. And then as situations progressed around the country, I think it gave us more insight on what needs to be done. And again, I'm feeling very optimistic. I think that there is a lot of opportunity and a lot of lanes for people to play in to get some really meaningful things done. So I'm good. I'm really good. Thank you.
I'll go next. I'm feeling amazing, actually, this whole pandemic and everything. In the beginning, it was a little rough and I wasn't liking it, but throughout the months, I've learned to sit down, self-reflect and pick up new things and learn new things. So it's been really good. And I'm appreciating the break from just work and everything, just to have time for myself.
Hey, I guess I'll go next. Tandalaya London, Vice President of Business Services at the Brooklyn Chamber. When this first started, there was a lot of uncertainty around, how we would survive, not only as a chamber, but also personally, getting used to a new routine, like this new abnormal that we're living in right now. There was like a lot of uncertainty around it, but now I feel like, there's going to be something that comes out of it. You know, we're going to learn how to think creatively and how to repurpose ourselves to accommodate any kind of crisis that comes along, because this is not the first pandemic. It's not going to be the last, you know, so if anything, this is a learning tool and a stepping stool for you to think creatively and out of the box on how to repurpose yourself and how to just remain confident within this space and how to work within this space and just get used to this new normal, you know, the virtual reality thing. Like the technical thing, it was a challenge, but now I'm a Zoom expert. I am a Netflix expert. You know, so, you know, it brought challenges, but then again, it brought an outside way of thinking out the box, you know, and I think that it also resonated in that way with our business owners and our chamber members. Yeah, that's it.
Well, I guess I'll jump in. I feel more encouraged in the last 2 minutes than I did before I got on because people have been so positive, so that's wonderful. I must say that on the pandemic public health side, you know, the way the numbers are going nationally and some of the conversation is a little discouraging to me. I was hoping we were moving toward a place that it seems like it's going to be very difficult to get there. So on the public health side, I must say I'm discouraged is too strong, but anxious. On the kind of social justice side, and they're obviously connected, and because I work at the Police Athletic League and much of the national discussion centers around a lot of what we do, it's a horrible time in one sense, but I hold some optimism that we have reached a moment where we can really break through. So in an odd way, even though we're looking at some terrible occurrences, I feel in my job and some of our mission that we've been, I think as some of the other panelists have said, we've been handed an opportunity to be better. And so I'm sort of looking forward to the chance to really take advantage of that.
Yeah, I think that, you know, we live in a time now where even the question of how are you and how are you doing has become complicated and layered. You know, I used to be able to give a very easy answer to that. I always start out with health. I'm strong, I'm healthy. My most close loved ones are healthy and strong. And, you know, that's what I think is something we all have to, you know, thank our blessings for if you're fortunate enough to say that. This is a, you know, very debilitating time for so many. But, you know, I'm a social justice entrepreneur. I'm a social entrepreneur. It's not in a traditional kind of business space. And so we have confronted these twin pandemics, I call them twin plagues, from the beginning of our foundation, which is, you know, the economic inequality that is producing the racially disparate effects around COVID that, you know, has already been mentioned. You know, there's nothing inherently different about Black and brown people in terms of getting COVID. It's tied to economic realities, which I'm sure we'll talk about later. So from our organization, we've had to provide 35,000 meals in the last 12 weeks. That's something we've never done before, but it shows the incredible need in communities, low-income communities of all backgrounds and colors, but disproportionately Black and brown. And so, you know, I share the concern of the last speaker that, you know, the city and country still doesn't really feel ready. You know, I work with young people and I'm very concerned about September and the lack of preparation for public schools and how children will go to school, and we can't open our schools and many people can't work. And so I'm very concerned about the health realities, but also the socioeconomic realities. And, you know, when it comes to the issue of organizing and activism in the face of racial, you know, oppression and systemic racism, on one hand, I'm hopeful that there's so much conversation now and attention, but I'm also deeply concerned that the changes will be changes that are, you know, merely the facade and only a covering and not systemic and deep changes. And conversation around the police is one, but it's much broader than just the police. And, you know, I think we need to have those conversations. And so I'm concerned about what the future of the movement looks like. And I'm glad so many are engaged now. I hope that the staying power is there. And I hope that we can continue to, you know, move towards, you know, equality, equity, justice, you know, full opportunity for all.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for giving a sense of how you're feeling. If we had days upon end, I would ask everyone in the room how you're feeling, but however, we don't have time to do that. So we're just going to dive in. And I would like to segue from what Kari just mentioned, the keyword systemic, that I'm glad that we are twinning these two pandemics because they are indeed connected and they do not exist within a vacuum. I am not a historian by training, but I am a lover of history. And I think oftentimes we talk about current events in a vacuum. We talk about them ahistorically, and we forget that there is so much rootage beneath some of these issues, right? Just looking at today, if we can talk about the gap between, let's say, the average white family and the average Black family. Whites have 10 times more wealth than Black families here in the United States. If you're looking at the COVID pandemic, right, Black folks are 5 times more likely to be hospitalized because of more comorbidities, right? If you look at number of businesses that have been closed, on 40% of Black businesses, there's been a decline during the COVID pandemic. And so, and if you take these numbers, you might think to yourself, you could take them a sort of anemic kind of way and not fully understand how they're connected to our history. So that is why I really liked that Kari was linking this back to our history. So let us start there. If some of you could go a little bit more deeply into telling us, and briefly because our time is now 6:26, how do you see the history in this country connected to these two pandemics that we are facing today?
I don't know if Kari wants to take it since he's sort of kicked us off, not to put you on the spot, but sure. I can jump in as well.
Sure, I'll jump in. So, you know, I think history is essential to understanding both realities and pandemics. I am a historian by training, so I do kind of lean towards an understanding of one's past to understand the present and the future. You know, when you start talking about COVID and the disparate effects around COVID, the reasons for the disparate effect around COVID is because of economic inequality, it's because of racial persecution, it's because folks live in substandard housing, it's because people are more likely to be diabetic, more likely to have asthma, more likely to have hypertension. It's because people can't socially distance in the way that we're being directed to do so because many people are living in apartments. It's about who's the frontline workers, which are disproportionately Black and brown, who can't adhere to the policies about not leaving their homes or going to the supermarket once every 2 weeks and buying lots of food. You know, if you're the Department of Education, you tell children, come 3 times a day to get a meal. And that's great that that food is provided, but then it's telling low-income, disproportionately Black and brown kids to leave their homes 3 times a day and return to their parents, their grandparents in a way that, you know, upper middle class and wealthy kids are not. The health outcomes, and you know, we only have an hour more, so we can't go into all of it, but you know, the health realities in the Black and brown community and the disparate health outcomes are clear, and were clear pre-COVID. So we are located in Harlem. The lifetime expectancy in central Harlem is 70 years. The lifetime expectancy on the Upper East Side, 1.5 miles away, is 91 years. So when you think about what it means to live 20 years less, but also what does it mean to lose one's elders? What does it mean for a community and a society to lose elders? You know, that has historic and current realities. You know, when you're dealing with the issue of systemic racism in our country, you know, this is a nation that is built, whatever type of business exists now, it's built on stolen land using stolen labor. That is the reality of the founding of the country. You know, George Washington owned hundreds of enslaved people. Thomas Jefferson enslaved his own children. We have to name that. You know, it's not much more barbaric a thing than you can do than enslave your own children. And so when you think about that reality and that these are the quote founding fathers of the nation, you know, in the history of Black America, 13 generations were born into slavery. 4 generations were born into segregation, which was legalized apartheid in this country that restricted the development of Black wealth in addition to Black freedom. And only 2 generations have been born legally free. And so when you look back at that history, you realize 17 generations of slavery or segregation and 2 only born legally free, that provides context to what we're facing right now, that this is a part of a historic continuum that brings us to where we are. It doesn't mean we haven't made incredible strides. It doesn't mean that there haven't been barriers broken. It doesn't mean that I would not rather be born Black in 2020 than my grandmother born Black in the 1920s. I'm clear enough to identify that. But the realities we face today are directly connected to that history and the continuing effects of that history. And I think that's what folks mean when we say white supremacy. It's not about individuals. It's about systems and government that created systems many years ago that are self-perpetuating today. And the last example I give of that is around wealth, since this is about entrepreneurship. You had systems of wealth creation in this country that were kept from Black people, that were offered to white people and built multiple generations of wealth. The GI Bill to build a home was only accessible to white people and not to Black people. When I asked my grandmother, who was part of 7 siblings orphaned because their parents died when they were young, whether they applied for welfare, she said, no, welfare was only reserved for poor whites in North Carolina. When you look at redlining and Social Security, these are all things that were kept from Black people. And so when you look at labor protections, the 2 groups that were precluded from protection of labor protections were domestic workers and farm workers, because those were Black positions in the South, and Southern senators refused to include those groups. And so when you know that reality, much of what's happening today can be seen through a different lens and understood, I think, in a different way. And so I think history is central for us understanding the twin pandemics that we're currently facing.
Thank you, Brother Kari. Thank you for that foundation. And I'd just like to talk a little bit, expand from that. Needless to say, this has been a few tough months for Black folks, right, in this country. It's not new. We've been through things before, but in recent times, the frustration that we're seeing in the streets is not about George Floyd, right? It's about folks being tired of being treated less than, and not just by the police, right? It's about protesters giving voice to their anger. It's about anger with a little bit of sadness, right? Black communities across the country have been ravaged by COVID-19. And not only the health aspect, but also the economic fallout, right? It's about a series of attacks on people of color by police and by everyday citizens, caught on tape, right? We've seen it in recent months, circulated in the news, but it's about a pain through communities that have been suffering for decades. And this is not 1968, right? This is worse. The nation has faced these sorts of moments before. However, we're supposed to be past that, past the direct assaults on these dual pandemics, but apparently not. COVID-19 has laid bare to the underlying racial injustices and disparities within our cities, whether disproportionate rates of infections and deaths in Black and brown communities, access to healthcare, housing, economic opportunity, or through the economic devastation of job loss, right? This is the things that communities of color have been really facing. And, as we struggle with these assaults, policymakers and academics and others are now pointing to the New Deal, right, as a model of how federal government should respond to today's crisis. And again, Brother Kari sort of touched upon these protections for other groups that were not afforded for Blacks, right? However, we are well aware of the flaws of this historical legislation, creating deeply entrenched racial and financial inequities that persist to present day. Millions of Americans, right, received a foothold in the middle class through the New Deal. However, Black and brown workers across the country were systematically excluded from these key programs, like protections under the National Labor Relations Act. Also programs like the Homeowners Loan Corporation. In fact, the Federal Housing Administration promoted racial covenants and other instruments of segregation by refusing home loans to Black and brown families. So we can't make these mistakes again, right? There's a precedent of this injustice that has been institutionalized and that is affecting the generations of today. So as we move forward out of this dual pandemic, we need to make sure we learn from the mistakes of the past, seize the time, seize the moment in time that we have, the leverage that we have to make sure that we do it better. Make sure we're advocating on the local end, right, to affect change in our communities, but also on the federal lens, so that the policies and initiatives and the legislation that is meant to serve the communities actually serve the communities that it's meant to help.
Something I wanted
Mhm.
to
Yes, go ahead.
mention,
Yes.
mention about in healthcare, everything builds upon itself. So we know how the history and the system has created just the way that things operate. But some of the things that I face on a daily basis that worked against us was a lot of Black and brown people, rightfully so, have a lack of trust in the healthcare system. My thing is, you know, having patients see a physician that is nice and friendly and someone that they can trust, that they want to come to the doctor, that they're not only coming when something bad happens. So you have this situation where no one really knows what's going on. The information changes every single day because we really don't know what's going on. And there's already this lack of trust. So would you go to the hospital? You're going to wait, you know, Black and brown people wait until it's sort of like, you know what I mean? Like some people, they don't go home. They get found, you know, dead in their homes because they don't go to the hospital, because it's just, well, are they going to help me? Is the ventilator is going to kill me? The reason why people are dying is because of this, you know, and it's based on the fact that Black people were abused and used as research subjects, and a lot of medicine was just built on these things. And then it goes to implicit bias, which we talk a lot about in maternal morbidity and mortality, but it's throughout the whole healthcare system where it's studied, and you can do the same things now with doctors in a hospital, and you would see it. There is a perception that Black people feel less pain and, you know, so they're not taking as seriously as others would. I hear stories of patients coming in, being brought in by EMS, both patients with asthma, and one patient has gotten a breathing treatment, things like that. The other patient wasn't, because they were like, oh, it's COVID, maybe I shouldn't give them the treatment. So if you knew for this person that they're asthma and they needed this medication, like, it's just the system doesn't, it just looks at Black people differently, like everything else. So there's this implicit bias where Black people are going to the emergency rooms, they're going to get help over and over and not being taken as seriously. And then also, if we just look, we know that there are chronic medical issues. There's diabetes, high blood pressure, all these things that were already affected by the implicit bias, was already affected by the lack of trust. And now you add COVID on top of that. And not only does that make the outcomes worse, but people won't go into doctor's offices, were closed. You're not going to the hospital. So you're not, you know, treating the diabetes. You're not going for that chest pain. You're not going for all these other issues that would have gotten monitored or treated or, you know, looked at, because now you're not going because either it's not available because offices are closed, or you're not going because you don't want to go to the hospital because you don't want to get COVID. So your diabetes gets worse and worse and worse, and you're sick with that. Then you have to, then on top of that, somehow you're in the community, you now get COVID, and it's so much worse. So there's just this like perpetuation of one thing just adds to the other. It's just like a losing battle almost for some of those in our community.
Thank you for us historicizing these two pandemics. Against the backdrop of those two pandemics, the entrepreneurs who are on the panel, could you share with us what has been your personal journey in being an entrepreneur, and what have been some of the hindrances, personal as well as structural?
Okay, so I'll start again. I'm a physician, you know, went to medical school with the aim of going to residency, getting a practice, and it was, it probably wasn't horrible, but in my mind at that time, it was horrible. I felt overworked, I felt underpaid, I felt that I was just being piled on top of, and I felt that people were making decisions for me and my patients that I got this crazy idea somewhere along the line. Instead of just looking for a new job, I'm like, I'm going to open my own practice. And so that was kind of like the beginning of my entrepreneurial journey, because I felt like I needed to create somewhere where I felt my patients can have the type of care that I felt they needed. I needed to create a place where I felt as a physician I can flourish, and I needed to create a space where even employees and others that are working in a level of like community, like I'm like chill, I want everyone to be like all happy and zen, and I just wanted to create that. So that was like the beginning of entrepreneurship for me. I think one of the things that I struggled with is not knowing how to do that. It's sort of like I'm going to open a business and not realizing that I was opening a business, and sort of not knowing consultants, and I tried to get help, but in retrospect, it wasn't good help. And so here I am now, dropped into a business, and I have staff, and I have patients, and I have a lot of debt. And, you know, trying to navigate that by myself. So I think that was 4 or 5 years of just trying to basically do what's right for my patients. And I need to stay here in my community in Harlem because there's only one of me, and I'm doing this great thing for them. But at the same time, I'm not making money. I'm working other jobs because I have to pay my own bills. And it's just a cycle of, you know, not working because it's just me doing everything. And not wanting to give up on that because I felt that this was a need where I closed my practice. But before that, I met all these wonderful people who had their own ideas and sort of that I can share with, that I was like, yes, this is what I want to do, or other ways to sort of figure out a way to give the care that I want. And so now I'm in more of a multi-specialty practice where I'm not like the only one, you know, doing everything and innovating with technology and things that I couldn't do by myself. And so it's so much more enjoyable and so much more hopeful. Finance, money, and knowing how to start a business so you don't get into like debt and go broke, knowing how to build a team around you and not trying to do it on your own, because that did not work for me. And that's really difficult. And knowing, just so kind of like not try to look to other people. I feel like in the community, especially like entrepreneurs, especially like Black people, maybe we don't want to do it, especially women. It's like, I can do it, I want to do it. And it's sort of like you don't always look for help, and you kind of just want to carry it all on your back, which is really hard. So I think the lessons that I learned was basically not trying not to do it by myself, and finding people who I can go walk with. And now in the businesses that I've co-founded, realizing like, you get funding and you get people to invest in your business, and you don't just like, financially ruin yourself. So I think those were some of the struggles, and you can do it and you can still accomplish or make that change that you want, but it's definitely a struggle, but definitely rewarding.
Any others on the panel who would like to respond to that? Any hindrances you see to Black entrepreneurship in general?
I'd like to jump in. One of the many hats that I wear at the Brooklyn Chamber of Commerce is that I also oversee our NYC Business Solutions Center located at 9 Bond Street, downtown Brooklyn. And we're contracted through the Department of Small Business Services to run direct services to small businesses and entrepreneurs. The suite of services that we do offer include business courses for those that want to start their own business. We do offer financing assistance, pro bono legal services for those that don't understand how to structure a business. What I would say, it's not more of a hindrance, but it's more of a lack of knowledge of the resources that are available. to Black entrepreneurs. There are resources available for you to, for assistance for building a business plan. There's resources available for funding, because we also do funding as well. We work with over 40 different non-traditional lenders that are open to lending to entrepreneurs. So I would say that the city also has to do a better job of getting these services out to the Black communities, helping them to understand that there are these different services that is available to them in order for them to build their brand, in order for them to make that dream come true as to becoming an entrepreneur. When it comes to building a business plan, like how many entrepreneurs in the community know exactly the steps to take to building a business plan. We also offer business courses. We have a first steps to starting your own business course that will teach you how to build out a plan for your business plan to get you ready for funding. So we're here to help you along the way in those particular steps to ensure that you have a solid business plan in place, you know, where you're understanding the financials of the business, you're understanding how to market the business, you know, just to set you up for success and for growth. You know, so I would say that there needs to be more education around the resources available for those that want to start their own business and become entrepreneurs.
Tondela, I want to ask, you know, because there has been a history of redlining in this country, loan discrimination. What does that look like in New York City, or your sense of it? And what are some of the ways that folks for that, you know, one of my sisters lives in New Jersey. She was interested in, still is, in having her own business, and she says it's so difficult to get a loan. And she sees that friends around her, you know, white friends whose credits are worse than hers, they're able to get loans. How can folks who are interested in becoming entrepreneurs potentially circumvent that?
Well, I don't think there's a way to circumvent that. I think what it boils down to is understanding the type of lenders that will lend to our communities, like CDFIs. You have CDFIs that are set up in communities that understand the struggles that a lot of entrepreneurs go through, especially those of color, when it comes to credit and things of that nature. Like at the center, for instance, if we see that your credit is not up to par to even refer you to a lender that has the most lenient credit criteria, we will refer you on to the Office of Financial Empowerment that will help you to build your credit up to where you can actually meet that criteria for that non-traditional lender. You know, sometimes you don't have to go to a Chase. You don't have to go to, you know, a larger bank. You have these smaller CDFIs, which are community development financial institutions in your community that you can go to that will help you along the way in the steps to building your credit and securing funding.
Any other panelists would like to jump in there?
I'll jump in. I don't consider myself an entrepreneur in the traditional space. I think just simply the nature of being a Black woman, a person of color in this country. I think we all have to be entrepreneurial, especially during times where, you know, there are ebbs and flows in the economic status of this country. You know, I really just wanted to talk a little bit about historically, you know, the benefit or where Black entrepreneurship come from, right? Because people of African descent in this country have played a profound role in shaping the United States business industry. Sometimes, most of the times out of necessity, but, you know, we have really sort of shaped the economic basis of our communities, whether it was the Black church and having that entrepreneurial spirit out of a necessity of building our communities and owning our own and building from there, whether it is fighting racial discrimination and getting a job and again, having to start our own business, whether it's working for someone else and identifying a need and then having to be an entrepreneur and figuring out how to fill that need in that structure that you are in. And throughout my professional career, I have found myself in that space, whether it is running a not-for-profit organization or starting a not-for-profit organization, whether it was in government, right? And figuring out how to use the leverage in my position to then benefit the communities that needed needed the services where we saw gaps. But what really is embedded in this country's history is, that the Black community has a long history of entrepreneurship since the Reconstruction era, right? The period after the Civil War, right? We saw a sharp rise in the number of Black-owned businesses in this country. And this was an attempt to right the wrongs of slavery, right? The inequalities of slavery. In the late 19th century and early 20th century, there was a resurgence of Jim Crow, which, led to the decline of Black entrepreneurships. But Black businesses, had to sort of come in again and build our communities. If we look at Black-owned companies like Madam C.J. Walker's hair care line, right? And the businesses that formed the Tulsa, Oklahoma's Black Wall Street, right? We just are coming off the anniversary of the devastation and the tearing down of Black Wall Street. These were all developed in a direct response to racial discrimination. But, I sort of just wanted to remind folks that, we have an entrepreneurial spirit out of necessity in this country, whether it's the denial of, getting into that, law firm that you wanted to go to, or after graduating med school and, figuring out that there is a better way to serve our community. It's just the nature of what we've had to do in order to make that difference, to help us get over that hump. But there's still that economic gap in this country, and, ownership, and that includes owning your own business, is a way to shorten that gap and lessen that gap. So I just wanted to raise that there are instances of obstacles and hindrance in Black entrepreneurship, but there's also massive opportunities. And over time, we have seen how those opportunities have really helped to shape our communities.
Melva, I do appreciate it, and thank you for bringing up Tulsa, which is considered the Black Wall Street. A friend and brother of mine, Rico Wright, is running for mayor there and is trying to have a resurgence in Black Wall Street, and so you all should read up on it and support that brother. In 1921, over 1,000 homes were destroyed on Black Wall Street, 300 lives taken, or because of white vigilantism. And so I want to match that with now during COVID, you're seeing a resurgence of mutual aid. And to me, Black Wall Street, I conceptualize it as a kind of mutual aid. And so I have been hearing a discourse among many Black owners that there needs to be some kind of systemic movement towards mutual aid for Black business owners. Do you have any examples of that happening today? Or what advice do you have for businesses that may want to form more of those sort of coordinations?
I'll just jump in here for a second. I want to, I think speak to the realities of the economy that we're in now. And I think, Dr. Watts began to mention this during his comments. So I'm the executive director and co-founder of an organization called the Brotherhood Sister Soul. And so it's a term that's wasn't used that widely when I co-founded the organization, but now is pretty widely used, which is a social entrepreneur. So someone who identifies an issue of social change or social need and creates an answer to that has an entrepreneurial side to it as well. So just for numbers perspective, we've been around 25 years. We serve over 2,000 young people a year. We're building an $18 million building in Harlem. We have 35 employees. So the fact that we work on education and food justice and social justice and racial justice is what our mission is. But then there's this entrepreneurial side to that of how do you support that work? How do you raise that money? And as was just said, you have to think about government money and foundation money and individual contributions as well. We're at a moment now where there's 40 million unemployed people in this country. And that's an undercount because of how many people are no longer looking for work. The reality is that if COVID continues in the way that public health experts identify, And let's put aside the politicians and let's put aside the people who have wishful thinking. We just look at the epidemiologists and the doctors and the medical health professionals. COVID is going to be with us for a long period of time. And the economic ramifications are going to be extreme. And so what I think all entrepreneurs, regardless of sector, need to think about is what is a way to navigate completely new terrain. I mean, we are facing the greatest depression that this country has ever seen as a possibility. And so if you're starting a business or if you're running a business, you have to answer how you navigate that new landscape. How do you raise capital? How do you ensure that employees can get to you if you're running a business? For us, we don't look at it as a business, but we have to figure out how do young people get to us, right? With restrictions on transportation. How do we feed young people? How do we allow our staff to feel safe and secure? There's a whole new series of questions that we have to answer as entrepreneurs of how do you operate in this new landscape? And so I think it's critical that we take a cold, kind of steady eye on what we are facing. And the economic situation in this country is one of devastation. And I don't think we can, we can use language that's hyperbolic to talk about that. If young people can't go back to school in September, again, how will people go to work? If you don't have the ability of people to really work in retail and work in restaurants and in bars, and you lose all of that, what will happen to low-income wage earners who are in many of those positions? What do we do about people who are taking care normally of people in their homes in terms of domestic workers? And you can no longer enter into people's homes because of their concerns or your concerns. There's so many economic issues we're facing now. And I think as entrepreneurs, we have to first step back and think about how we navigate through what is completely uncharted territory. And because we've been so focused, rightfully, on the COVID health pandemic, I don't think there has been enough of a focus on the economic ramifications that will come from that. Last example I would give of it has to do with rental. And when you think about all the renters in this city who are low income or middle income wage earners who have lost their job because they cannot work from home for 3 months, and that 3 month of rent is going to come due tomorrow on July 1st. The fact that you can no longer remove people from their homes is not a sufficient answer to how they will pay 3 months of rent. That's the kind of conversation that the city and state are not adequately dealing with. And so eviction relief is not the same thing as rent relief. And that's going to have a major effect in our city and in our country.
I want to use that as a platform to ask a bigger question. The Black Lives Matter movement and other movements for racial justice and economic justice in this country, they're calling for an economic restructuring because the pathway that we're on, they think it's unsustainable. One, do you agree, any of the panelists? And two, if you do agree that it's unsustainable, how can we correct course? How can we restructure the system? Or do you think it's not possible? Do you think that there are way too many entrenched issues to entirely restructure this economy?
Well, I'm going to take a stab at that, even though I'm in a sort of a different space. But a million years ago, I majored in economics in college, and I sort of see at least what our mission is. And I think we're at a point of colliding ideas. In other words, protesters and people that are fed up and have had enough want radical change because they think moderate change hasn't done the trick. And that makes sense. But while we're seeking that radical change, I feel like, and it may just be me temperamentally, we still need to chip away and do better with the rules we've been given. So for example, us as a nonprofit attempting to educate thousands of kids, we can't stop that and change the way the world views those kids. We have to prepare those kids to be able to compete in whatever world they inherit and get. Now, it's our job to make that world a better, fairer, more balanced world. But I guess I'm a little nervous that the call for radical change, which may very well be necessary, will crowd out the preparation to do better in the world we have. And that may be part of the time I was born. I was born in the 50s. I grew up in the 60s. My parents grew up poor in Harlem. And they just, that generation, they took what they were given and made the best of it. And that's not fair. But at least in my personal instance, they did a pretty good job. And many of our elders did a phenomenal job with the little they were given. And I would just like to, while we're trying to restructure, I just want to remember we can continue to prepare ourselves as a community in a way where we can win. Maybe we can't win, but we can do better at this game while we're trying to make the game fair for everybody. That's, I guess, my sort of thought from my perch.
Fred, while we're there, could you tell me more? Because, you know, I'm an educator at heart. In Trinidad, my grandmother had some staircase in front of her house, and I used to chalk the stairs and pretend they were kids. So I think I'm, you know, I'm a teacher at heart, you know. How are you all preparing the kids? Are you giving them an entrepreneurial mindset to sort of see the world anew and to be creative?
Well, again, this is one man's perspective. I think that while you develop that entrepreneurial spirit, you have to develop the fundamentals. So to me, and you know, our structure is set up, get a kid prepared for kindergarten, get a kid prepared, let him or her continue to thrive on knowledge, prepare them for college. What I have seen is from, quite frankly, from the kids that I have interacted with, older kids, they have that entrepreneurial spirit. I think the great successes that they see are often people that did make the world bend to them and not bend to the world. You know, in a previous generation or two previous generations, you know, my grandmother told me the greatest thing you can get is a city job. You know, bend to the community, but create your own foundation. Okay, that was fine for her because she was born in the 1890s. But I think the youth today actually do have a entrepreneurial spirit. I think we have to encourage it in some of the project-based learning that we do with youth. But I think that's a key to what your question. But in the end, in coordination with that, I would like to build the fundamentals so they know what it is to go get a loan. So they know what banking is. So they know. I've got friends that are wealthy. They wouldn't dream of investing their own money. They'd invest somebody else's money for their success. I think that we have to build those foundational principles and nurture, as you say, that entrepreneurial spirit.
Also, Fred, or anyone on the panel, you know, folks are very much concerned that the academic achievement gap is going to widen during COVID, kids staying at home, lack of access to technology. How can we think entrepreneurially about helping our Black kids to make sure they get the education that they need?
I do think that that's a huge issue. I mean, I know in our experience with after-school programs, even when we created an online learning platform, we got children interested in it and young adults interested in it, but they didn't have the Wi-Fi in their neighborhood to access it, or they didn't have the device to access it. So I do feel, and quite frankly, while I was aware of this, I didn't realize how significant the problem was. And just like COVID impacted us disproportionately, so too did this digital divide impact us. So it puts us in a position where we may even fall further behind than we are now. So how to attack it, I think you got to be a little smarter than me to figure that out. But I do think that diagnosis is the number one, step one. We have a diagnosis. We have been aggressive with funders. If you want to help this child, the first thing you have to do is try to shrink that divide, whether it's Wi-Fi, hotspots, devices. We have entire families operating on one cell phone. You're not going to have a meaningful education. You've got 3 kids in an apartment and one cell phone to access remote learning opportunities. They're not opportunities. So it is your diagnosis is correct. And right now, quite frankly, funding and support, recycling, sometimes even recycling technology would at least narrow that gap.
Thank you. I want to bring Armani, who is the president of the Black Student Union at St. Francis College, into the conversation. Armani, could you tell us what are some concerns that your generation has regarding entrepreneurship and Black ownership, racial injustice in this country?
Yeah, well, for me, I'll speak personally. Before this whole pandemic, happened, I wanted to really enter the entrepreneurship world. I planned to launch something, but as soon as this hit, it stopped everything. It stopped the shops. I couldn't be able to print things. I couldn't be able to design things. And it really set me back a few months where I wanted to. And that's because we, depend so much on technology. And once everything happened where we had to close everything and we had to stay 6 feet away, it put us at a point where I couldn't begin to do things. Even my friends, he has his own business where he's ordered shirts and everything. But because of this, it's been set back months after. But this whole pandemic, I hope that we learn from it, not to, focus so much on, depending on the technology we have, I hope we can do better things for it. And going on to the future, because I do plan on launching it maybe July. I wouldn't say early July, mid-July. I do plan on launching it. I just say, like Tandolaya said, resources. That's something I need I'm in need of it. I want to know how can I get, help from this government, or how can LLCs, all these different type of things that's not, really out there for me unless I go out there and do my own research to do it. Until she, mentioned it, I didn't even know about things like that. And that's something I feel like, especially as a young Black man, having to be behind the race, because the white people have a head start. They have the funding in their family. They have the generational wealth to, hey, you want to start a business, here's the money. I don't have that. So the resources that, can be provided to me for me to know about it through flyers in my neighborhood, through people coming door to door, hey, do you know that you can do this? I would very much appreciate it. Not only me, but my friends. I had to, I'm looking up a course now that, it's not expensive or anything, but I had to look it up to find out how to start a business. What are the fundamentals of business, the do's and don'ts, where, this is things, I can learn in school and everything, or these are things that should be in the community. I should have a community center to go to, and he's like, well, young man, this is how we're going to help you, and this is what we'll do. But I don't have these things. I have to go out on my own to switch these things. I have to go into my own pockets and, really pay for these things where I'm trying to start a business. This isn't something I should go into my pockets and have to pay for starting a business, because that's the savings I want to start it. This is things that should be free in the community, where I go and they give me funding, where we say, well, we're going to help you start it out. We're going to give you a head start for once in my life. And I feel like this is something I've been seeing a lot of young Black men and women start launching their products. I feel like this is something we would very much need and appreciate.
Can I add something to that? I'm glad you said that, as far as being in the community, because through the Business Solutions Center, we are bringing our courses into the communities. In Brownsville, in Canarsie, we even give courses in different languages, to how to start your own business. So we are in the community, teaching minority-owned businesses, teaching immigrants on how to start their own businesses. So we are out in the community, and like I said, there's a lack of marketing when it comes to understanding understanding where these young individuals can go to start their businesses. So for me, my main goal as to being the director also of the Solution Center is to ensure that we're getting the word out. The Chamber has what we call Chamber on the Go. It's a van that goes out into the community to speak to minority-owned businesses, to speak to immigrant-owned businesses, to find what resources are really needed. So while we're out in the communities, we are speaking to the business owners, and we're also promoting our resources through the Business Solutions Center. That's what's available. So if you do have questions on where you can find our free business courses, you do not have to come out of pocket, I have to say free because for me, it's free. I'm there. But anyway, you don't have to come out of pocket for these courses. So do not pay for courses that, you know, for resources that are free and it's really at your doorstep, you know. If anyone needs my information, I will forward it on to you. We have a whole slew of business courses coming up in the next quarter, starting January. And like I said, we're in the communities, we give courses, we have partnerships with the local libraries in different areas of Brooklyn, especially within the minority areas of Brooklyn, to make sure we're delivering these particular courses.
And Tondalia, if in the chat, if you can just write maybe a website or your contact, because I see many folks are responding to what you're saying, but very positively.
Sure, will do.
Thank
I
you.
wanted to add something off of what has been said. So resources, yes, they're important. One of the things that I did when I was trying to figure out how to make my practice work by myself is I Googled a lot of, because I didn't have money, I couldn't, think of I want to do an MBA, but I don't have, I did at the time, I couldn't do an MBA, and I would Google programs. So I did Goldman Sachs, 10,000 small businesses. There was a program in Harlem, the Harlem Entrepreneurial Fund, and they had a streetwise MBA program just with other small businesses. We came together weekly and we, learned these, just learn how to run a business and build and do a business plan and a growth plan. There's a program that the bank had sent me for women entrepreneurs through Cornell University. So it's basically you can enroll in this free, and it's free classes, and at the end you get a certificate in entrepreneurship from Cornell. And I know that's hard. It sometimes it's like, oh my gosh, why do I have to go look for all of this? But I think it is going to take a lot of small steps. One is those of us, if you find out something, you find a resource, making a note of it and passing that along to those that are coming after you, having it available just so the people that can be like an entrepreneurial project, putting that together, all the different resources that there are, and having that available for, those to come so that they don't have to do as much deep digging as we did. And then the second thing is mentorship. Something that I was told along the line every time in my struggle, because it's a unique position in terms of, someone asked about private practices in the chat. Doctors aren't running to start private practices because they want to eat and pay their rent and have nice things and go on vacation. They're not like, and you can't I did these courses and other people, they're trying to tell me the basics, but it's a different place where it's like, we don't know, your situation is kind of unique. We don't know how to get you to make your private practice thrive. You need a mentor. And for the past few years, it's like, how do I find mentors? Who is doing what I'm trying to do? Where do I find them? Yes, I can find doctors, they're busy, or I can find a business person, or, that's a struggle. And I think those of us who are motivated by where we're at right now, and you want, instead of looking for this big systemic change, go and be mentors. Go and, tell others, find, I'm a SFC alum, or, whatever it is, figure out how to go into schools and just be like, okay, this is how you write a business plan, or this is what this is. I mean, that's the only way we're going to get past this, because it's not just going to happen like at the snap of our fingers and there's going to be change. We fight for big change, but we have to start where we're at with the small, with just these small steps. So if you know something, put it out there, share it, even if it's Facebook, just put it out there. Mentor and seek mentors. Go on LinkedIn. My CEO of one of the practices I'm with now, I don't even remember who contacted who. I think I was looking for a mentor, and he's trained as a physician, but did a MBA at Columbia, and he just was working in business, and I just reached out to him. And then with us chatting, I was trying to get help building my practice. Here I am now helping, as co-founder of this idea, because it was like, here's someone who was thinking what I wanted, and instead of him trying to fix my thing, it's like, let's come together and do something new. And that's just from like literally going on LinkedIn, and I messaged, I don't know how many people, but a lot of people, just because, you know, Google medical health director, like just random things, just because you know what I mean, just to get help. So sometimes it does take that, but that extra effort. But I think, you know, one by one, that's the only way that we can do it.
Thank you, Candice. We're going to open the floor now to questions, and I want to make an ask of Shanita and Antonavia, organizers of this event at SSC Innovate. After this event, if you can assemble action items that folks from the panel are posting in the chat, as well as any other ideas and resources folks have, and if you could put them all on the SSC Innovate website. Is that something that's possible? Okay, I see Shanita giving a yes. Okay, good. Because I see some folks asking in the chat for more resources. We are going to make a list because our panelists have lots of expertise, and we will put them all in one place on the SSC Innovates website. All right, Chris, let's open the floor now to any sort of questions you think haven't been answered as yet in the chat.
Thank you, Kim. And this is just a wonderful, wonderful event tonight. Just a great dialogue that I hope will continue. So first question of the panel, and just decide who's going to answer it first. This question might be more for Dr. Fraser. How can we get more Black or African-American physicians to open private practices in underserving communities? And is the medical co-working model something that can be viable for that purpose?
So I think it's a struggle. I think we want to help, and I think I'm, you know, not pat myself on the back, but I'm a little bit like non-traditional. I kind of try to think outside the box. So for me, going to medical school, being in debt and going into more debt and just, you know, still smooching off my parents is okay for me, because I feel like my patients are happy. But I think that's not everybody's, you know, that's not everybody's situation. So the way the healthcare system is right now, somewhere along the line, I don't know where, and I don't know who that smart person was, but they sort of gave over healthcare to corporations and big, you know, hospitals. So now you have these major, just think of New York, there's like 5 hospitals, like Presbyterian, Northwell, Mount Sinai. So now you have these larger systems that have then convinced other doctors, hey, you come, we take over, you don't have to do anything, you come, you show up, you get a piece of the pie. And so now we've gotten to the point where doctors have very little autonomy, and we can't make these decisions. And the system is sort of built against it, because as a hospital system, they can then negotiate with health insurance companies for these large, they get paid X amount of money. When I would do a delivery in private practice, I would basically get less than half of what someone in a big, working the same, like 2 blocks away, but because they were under Mount Sinai, they're getting 2-3 times the reimbursement. Now, I am not having any assistance. I'm paying malpractice insurance. My malpractice insurance was like $150,000 a year, and things like that. So it's very difficult. I think one, it takes people who see the need and the a lot of people coming together. So like my CEO, he's like, you know, he was a consultant at McKinsey, and he knows that. So he knows how to like fundraise, and that's what he's doing. But a doctor just going out there is kind of hard. So I think it's going to take a bunch of people who want to see this coming and finding doctors. We're trying to build a multi-specialty practice in Harlem, and then move it to different parts in New York, and then even, you know, the country, just community-based practices. But you have to show doctors that this is gonna work. So it's gonna take a bunch of people willing to find the funding, willing to just, you know, bring it together and make it work for physicians to survive. It's not that they don't want to, but you can't have kids, you can't do things when you're just trying to, it's not like 20 years ago. So definitely it's going to be a group effort. And if, you know, other people can be supportive of physicians, then we can get back on that, you know, in that track of having people of color doctor in communities of color.
Okay, the next question is for any of the panelists to answer. How do we improve upon economic disparity in our society when most job creation seems to be happening in low-paying and less secure jobs?
You know, I think this relates to the last question that was asked in terms of the Black Lives Matter in a way. I mean, it's a tangent, but I think it's a central issue. I mean, I think what young people are always doing, and every movement for change in this country has always been led by young people. You know, young people led the effort for civil rights movement, Black Power movement, the women's movement, the LGBTQ movement, et cetera, et cetera. It brought down a president in Lyndon Johnson. So it's always been young people at the forefront, building on the generations that came before them, of course. And so I think what young people do often, and we're an organization that helps develop and hone youth leaders and youth organizers, is they imagine a different world. They imagine a different way of operating. This is the fundamental change. And so I agree that we can do the day in and day out work within the current system we're in, but then parallel to that, we need to be working to completely transform the system. So when you ask about low-wage workers, you know, the city just passed today a budget, an $88 billion budget. That's a $9 billion reduction, but still $88 billion. And part of that big conversation was about defunding the NYPD. And if everyone is not clear on what defunding means on this Zoom, just to be clear, it's the demand of $1 billion reduction in a $6 billion budget for the NYPD. So that's a 16% reduction. It's not that much money. It would reduce police to where it was when de Blasio came in 6 years ago. So this is actually not, I think, more substantial change is necessary, but it's really not that substantial. It's a 16% cut and a reduction by a few thousand police officers from 37,000 to 34,000. So then the question, and this is what comes back to the question you're asking, Chris, becomes theoretically, what do you do with that $1 billion? So let's just use one example of that. Maybe I'll give you two examples. One, there are more NYPD personnel in our public schools than there are mental health providers, guidance counselors, nurse practitioners combined. So we're saying to our children, it's more important to have NYPD personnel in our schools than to make sure that you're mentally strong, dealing with trauma, having the support you need to navigate the complexities of poverty. So that's a choice. That's a budget choice that we allow to happen. And so when you're saying, Chris, how do we prepare more people to enter into the workforce? Well, what are we doing in our public schools, which are the most segregated schools in the United States of America, here in New York City? So that would be at the front end, right? If we're not training them and educating them sufficiently through elementary school because we're not putting the resources in place, that's the front end. But what's the next step? The next step for so many Black and brown and Asian and also white low-income young people is the CUNY system. CUNY used to be free. Right now, CUNY, the total fees paid by students is a little under $900 million a year. Does that number sound familiar? Sure, it's about $1 billion. So we could make the CUNY system free for every student in the CUNY system, which would help with them advancing educationally and moving higher in the workforce, or we can spend that $1 billion on the NYPD. That's a budgetary choice. And so when we think about the advancement of people in terms of their training, in terms of their education, that allows people to have other types of jobs, so much of that comes back to education. And when we're not spending the money, the resources, or smart money on education and doing what we need to prepare people, in turn, you have folks who are not being prepared for the global economy, let alone the New York economy. So I think it comes back to education in terms of preparing young people, but it's about the budget decisions that we make. And this is our city. The budget's a moral document. It's a statement of priorities. And for too long, those priorities have been swayed towards crime, punishment, enforcement, and not in terms of social services and in terms of education. So I think that's a key conversation if we're talking about employment and we're talking about people that were moved through economic class.
Great answer, Kari. We're going to do a little bit of a different change of pace before we get back to questions. We actually have quite a few people asking about what services that SFC offers for small business and potential entrepreneurs. So I'm going to hand the floor over for a couple seconds to my good friend and colleague, Ada Sanchez, with Center for Entrepreneurship. So Ada, if you could share some of those resources. Okay, somebody might need to unmute her.
Hi, everyone. I wasn't I'm sorry. I wasn't expecting to.
Sorry to surprise you, Ada.
No. That's okay. So we do have a number of opportunities to reach out and help. Normally during in normal times, we usually do 2 evening small business orientation panels and discussions. We also offer help to our students. We have open hours with the Center for Entrepreneurship where you can come in and we'll do an intake and we'll understand what your needs are and we will refer you out to mentors or to free or low-cost service providers that you may need. We do mentor matching quite a bit. And then if you're a student and you want to take a course, we have an Introduction to Entrepreneurship course, which is part of our general education program. So if you need to fulfill your Gen Ed SEH body of knowledge, it fits right in your schedule, or if you have a free elective, that might be a great course to take. In there, you'll learn how to write a business plan. We talk about funding. We talk about building businesses. We talk about management. We talk about the first hires. We get you out into the community to meet with entrepreneurs. Normally, we have anywhere from 8 to 10 guest speakers, which within each section of the course. So we run 5 or 6 sections a semester. So we have somewhere around 40 guest speakers per semester throughout that program. Additionally, we have other resources. I put my email in the chat. Anyone who's interested, feel free to reach out. We also do a summer boot camp for students 16 to 21 this year. Obviously not live. We're doing something virtual, hopefully good but different, as good but different, but we'll be back up next summer, hopefully, doing that boot camp. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Ada, for the valuable information. Another question, and this is for any of the panelists. Can you give us any advice on finding mentors and building our own proverbial personal board of directors?
Well, I'll jump in. I don't have any earth-shattering advice. I'm gonna piggyback on the doctor. I think that those seeking mentors, I have sought a mentor even much later in life. You'd be surprised how eager people are to be mentors. So I was a lawyer by trade. I became an executive director of a nonprofit. I was late into my 50s, and I found a guy in my town who was the executive director of a nonprofit. He was happy to let me buy him some pancakes and tell me how to do my job. So I would start with the notion that people want to be mentors. And I would, as the doctor suggested, I would go to LinkedIn, I would go to your school, I would email everybody on this panel and say, do you think you can connect me? These are my interests. We will find you somebody. I think I would not underestimate how much people like me, and I think all the panelists here, want to help. I've made a lot of mistakes in life. I want to pass on some of, the way to avoid some of those mistakes. And I would love to do it with somebody. And I think all of us would as well. So to me, I would use social media. I would use your school. I would use any adult in any panel, any guest speaker. You walk up to them and you say, I'm so-and-so. These are my interests. How do you think I can help? I assure you, they will find you somebody and people to help. But you have to take charge. You, the younger person or the developing person, has to take charge, but you will be rewarded.
And if I could just jump in there, and thank you, Fred, because I just want to underscore the use of social media. I think that is an incredible tool to reach out to a universe that most of us wouldn't normally have access to. And I have achieved a lot of great connections and relationships through social media, just DMing people through Twitter, right? I think that especially now in today's time where we are not in those public spaces and we are on our electronic devices more and we are consuming news that way and we are consuming information that way, I think you have the opportunity to see and be exposed to a lot. And I would definitely encourage that you use social media. And like Fred said, make the ask, right? They can't say yes unless you ask. And you would be surprised how many people are willing to give you advice. People like to talk. So use social media and make the ask.
How many questions do we have time for?
I think we're at our end here. Let me check in with Antonavia. Antonavia, should we wrap up? What do you think?
Yes, I think it's around that time. Our end time's around 7:30. I don't know if we want to.
Okay, so what we can do is that we can officially wrap up, and then folks who may want to hang around to answer more questions, I will stay on. We can do that. But officially, I want to please join me in thanking the panelists Melva, Kari, Tondalea, Candice, Fred, Armani for giving your time, your expertise, your heart, your ideas today. And thank you to Antonavia and Shanita and SSC Innovate for organizing this series. I think this is so important for our students and other folks in the community. And as we said, we are going to pool the resources from our panelists, and we will put it on the SSC Innovate website. I'm going to hand it over now to Antonavia to wrap things up for us.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Hakim. Thank you to all of our panelists. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm really encouraged by this conversation, and even more so by the call to action that's being asked for. So we're going to take all of the resources. We're going to reach out to to each panelist, find out what resources they have, and bring them to you. As they said, if you want to connect with them further, I think you really definitely should reach out to them, because they're saying, we are here, use us. So definitely take advantage of that. I would like to take the time to thank the St. Francis College community, because this did not happen by itself. It really does take a village, and especially during this pandemic, to really watch our SFC community come together. It really has been inspiring, and I'm happy to have been a part of it. And I know there's a lot of work to do, especially now that we've broached the topic of racism, now that we're saying that it's entrenched in all of our institutions, and now that we're deciding to look at it with eyes wide open instead of like brushing it under the rug. I think it's a really good place for us to start this conversation and to move the conversation from conversation to eventually a call to action and a transformation. And so I think one thing stood out with me with Fred, when you said you want that transformation, but you want to continue the building. And I think ideally, if we can have those two existing in the same space, we continue to build, but we see a transformation, because now that the cat's out of the bag, there's no going back. And so how can we continue to move forward intentionally? So thank you very much for the conversation. Those of you that want to stay on, please do. And I think that's it for my end. Thank you very much for joining.
Okay, so I see Nivard asking, what are the next steps to mobilize this movement into actions to ensure that it does not die down?
I have a response to that. I think I saw that pop up in the chat, and my number one step is vote. I would not underestimate the power of the vote. And I think that while activism is great and drawing attention and coming up with, but if the people in power can rebuff you, then this activism will hit a wall. You have to vote, and you have to create decision makers. We create the decision makers. Create decision makers that do what we think they ought to do. So to me, it starts with the vote. And that doesn't just mean I as an individual vote, but all efforts related to getting people to vote, to me, is crucial to this movement moving forward.
And if I may just jump in, I'm going to ride the wave of quoting rappers earlier. I also think we need to listen to Killer Mike, and we need to plot, plan, strategize, mobilize, and organize, and then take action, right? So I think that, again, it's really great that there is a lot of attention worldwide around what's happening here in this moment in time in this country. And that attention provides an opportunity to have that conversation, right? To be at that table. Now it's about being at the head of the table, right? And then really having a strategic plan in place for implementation. You know, over the last 2 months, I've constantly said, you know, this is great. Everyone's excited about sort of the position that we are in, meaning communities of color and Black communities specifically, but are we ready? Are we ready to make systemic change and have implementable plans? And I think the conversations are happening, and we have to seize the moment, right? There are opportunities. I was having a conversation with a major sports organization last week about a campaign that they want to run, right? Using Black culture, right? But you're not going to use Black culture to make you millions. If you really want to show your dedication to a community here in New York City, then you need to make changes within your organization that shows that commitment, right? We're talking about ownership opportunities. We're talking about real input, right? But now is the time to strategically make those asks and then implement it. And then to follow up on Fred's suggestion about voting, we need to vote, but we also need to complete our census. People don't understand the decennial census dictates how much representation that we get and the billions of dollars we get in our communities for essential services. We're in the middle of a health pandemic, and we've seen in certain communities, one, not having enough health centers to address the health crisis, and two, dealing with certain communities dealing with food insecurity. These are two things that are directly funded by census dollars. This is a proportionate amount of federal dollars that get distributed annually based on how many people live here. If we are not counted in the census, we don't get that support. We don't get that money. And this is a way that folks can step up. Even if you can't vote, you fill out your census. This is a way that you can be heard. On a congressional representation, right? It's not just about voting for a political person. One, it's about losing those seats. New York's point in fact, New York State has lost at least one congressional seat every decennial census since 1940. We lost 2 in 2000, another 2 in 2010. We are projected to lose another 2 in 2020. What happens to those seats? They go somewhere else. They don't disappear. They go to another state. That means that's less people in Washington fighting for the things that our communities want. And then it's not, again, just about the political representation. It's about what happens after it. It's about redistricting. It's about the electoral college votes, right, for presidential elections that come with congressional seats. This is a form of civic engagement and social action that people miss. And communities of color, Black and brown specifically, people of African descent, Black West Indians specifically in this country, historically have been undercounted and not represented in the census. We need to make sure that we are participating in this civic action so that our communities get what we deserve, so that we can continue the fight, continue the good fight, and really show that we are here and you're not gonna give us less than we deserve.
I'd like to add on to the voting and, registering for the census. I would say for us to stop becoming content. All the time, something happens, we fight for change and everything. A little change happens and then we become content again. And then it's a cycle, the whole thing happens again. And I think that we need to stop being lazy and we need to be active every time that, they give us something that we're like, okay, we're calmed down for now until something comes and, makes us right again, or we shouldn't have to do this. We have to continue fighting, continue pushing to be better, not just when they give us a bone that we're just happy until the bone is finished. So I'd say stop being lazy and just continue to be active.
I want to add that, when we see movements not being covered by the media, it does not mean that the movements have necessarily died. That folks have been and will continue to be working on grassroots organizations. If there are any students, if you're interested in being plugged into grassroots organizations in almost any state, you can contact me and I will put you in touch with a grassroots organization that's doing important work there. There's always work to be done.
I think being willing to be an individual, it's easy when a lot of people are doing a lot of things and we see that momentum. But sometimes, even if it's a little change, just having that mindset that you have to leave this earth having created a change, having had some impact, I think helps you just keep going, and you just keep pressing and figuring out what you can do and who you can bring along. Instead of, it's great to be a big movement, but sometimes you just have to grab someone and go into a school or organize, get some friends. Some of my friends from my church, there's like 9 of us, and we've met with the with some committees, because it's in Yonkers, with the Yonkers Human Rights Council, and figuring out like what money do you have to spend, and figuring out what programs, because even though they don't deal with everything, but they have money, and we can resource and use their money to go into schools and even teach kids about government. Like, why do you vote? What are the importance of, what is the structure? How do you get legislation changed? Because people don't, you know what I mean? They don't understand the importance of this. So it takes 1, 2, 3, 4 people just going and doing whatever you can do, and letting that just roll, you know, just keep gathering moss until it, you know, it makes something bigger happen. So I think just not underestimating your power and your influence, even if it's just to influence one person, it's worth it.
I see here Professor Hirsch asks or says, I'm following up on Melva's commentary and thinking about general education at SFC. It sounds like a civics course is something to consider. Any thoughts on this?
Yes. I mean, this just goes back to what Dr. Fraser just talked about. You know, people don't really understand government. They don't understand sort of the role of local government and participating in local elections, right? When you vote for judges, when you vote for district attorneys, people don't understand what it takes to create and pass legislation, and then how legislation turns into policy, and then that policy gets implemented, and then what happens in that process. I think census, voting, right? I think that, you know, it needs to happen starting in grade school, right? There's a great organization that works in the schools, in the grade schools, Generation Citizen, Generation Citizen, one or the other. But they do really great work around sort of teaching civics in school. We need to go back to that. And I think, you know, it will help people understand the movements that they're in, because again, it's great to have people in the streets, but then what happens after that? And there are different levels and ways you can participate and get involved in making that change.
Yeah, I would love to see a civics course, and one that not only shares information, but also gives people skills, one that's also community oriented. You know, I've been in the United States 22 years now, and I love living here. I think sometimes too, our overall development is bedeviled by individualism. And I would love to see folks thinking more about communities. It's okay to make money, but then when you make money, you got to reinvest in communities. You got to create programs for kids, right? So I would love to see a civics course that has some kind of social change project where students work in teams to make some community better. So connecting the knowledge with some kind of work in communities. I think that would go such a long way in engendering a kind of entrepreneurial and innovative and community-minded ethic in our students. Keisha, when you say collective of people, maybe I can unmute you and you could just ask your question. Where are you? Let me try and find you. If anybody else sees her, you can unmute her for us so we can hear her asking her question directly.
Can you hear me?
Oh yes, perfect. Go ahead. Yes, thank you.
Okay, I was just, you know, I'm typing and thinking at the same time. I was just stating how could you bring together? I look within my community, and what I see is, you know, just like I'm not sure one of the young men who was explaining about his business, right? And how he, even though things have turned around on a different end, and things are kind of on a standstill, when you have individuals who are, maybe they just starting to put something together, and they're in how you say, already at the bottom, but they have an idea or something. How could a collective of individuals who some may be of low income or maybe not have the funding, how could that coming together? I've been hearing that a lot. Come together and bring forth the opportunity for them to like learn, glean from one another, and also I guess maybe it might be a bridge to bring, you know, like whenever you might see a festival or a coming together of different events and people are able to show their wares or their things. How have you heard of anything recently or any information about a coming together of collective businesses or things that just started out? And even in the midst of this, just starting out and then all of a sudden things are not working out, but you in need of those collective, you need the information, you need to learn some more things to bring, not just for you, but there's other people. Because I know for myself, I've been even recently coming across quite a few people I'm finding out. I remember a gentleman who I know he has the truck, and I know that kind of is on a standstill. There's some other individuals who I know who does some cosmetic, and just trying to bridge that together, you know, to start them off, you know, to help them out, to get them to have a bridge in some way. That's the best way for me to explain it.
Sure, thank you. I see Shanita put here, Keisha, blackownedbrooklyn.com. I also, if you're interested in plugging into mutual aid organizations in New York City, I'm assuming you live in New York City, yeah?
Yes, I'm in Brooklyn.
Okay, awesome. And so that website is great for you. And if you're interested in any mutual aid in Brooklyn, I could find some and get you plugged into that as well too. It's a lot of it happening across the country. As I mentioned before, it's not sexy, it doesn't sell newspapers, right? So people don't really advertise it, but it's happening. So if you're interested, you can find me, Hakim Williams at Gettysburg College, and I could give you some of those resources.
Okay, will somebody be able to put the information in the link in the box?
Yes, Shanita, type here blackownedbrooklyn.com. It's in the chat. And I will also write my email address if you want to write me after this this conversation.
Thank you so much.
No, of course. So let's take two more questions. Let me try to scroll up here and see what has been said. So Chris said, is referring to civics classes, perhaps have students be mandated to perform some form of civic engagement, like an internship with public officials or volunteering on a campaign. That is fantastic. Let's see, Jean Drisseux wrote, was generationscitizen.org. Thank you so much for that. And Mahalia says, would any of the panelists say that as consumers, it is our duty to use this advantage to spend wisely? Do you believe that the less we spend for these major corporations, the bigger the impact we can make in shifting the modern consumer to be a more ethical consumer and thus paying more attention to the communities and activities that truly embody the core of American values? I mean, that's really wonderful, right? I mean, in the age of the fight for racial justice, we see companies being involved what's called brand activism. And some are more serious than others. You know, some are just tweeting support for Black Lives Matter, but others are really trying to restructure the ways in which they invest in certain communities. We know that the power of boycott, it's not a new tool. It has been used in the United States before. I remember the famous bus boycott. It took over a year, but folks walked to work and they were able to finagle some changes in that system. And boycotts have worked around the world as well. What do some of the other panelists think regarding withholding our money from major corporations?
I definitely agree with that. That's something I've been practicing actually this whole pandemic, ever since everything's been happening. I've put my money more towards, I know, local Black-owned businesses, local businesses that even my friends, you know, a lot of people, when they have friends who support businesses, instead of supporting them, they go and support the major companies that's not really doing anything for them. Where I know my friend, if I invest in him, he's eventually gonna get up there. So I know, you know, giving money to these major corporations that already has it, them missing my money, you know, is not going to do anything. But if we do it as, you know, as a family, and we all wake up from them and start to support the local small businesses, I feel like it will do a great impact and really get these companies to realize where a majority of their income comes from, because it comes from us, Black people. We're the ones who spend so much money on, you know, all these name brands, Off-White, Nikes and everything. And these are the same people, you know, not really doing anything for us when times like this arise. And I feel like, you know, I feel like it is my duty to support the small Black-owned businesses. It's my duty to make sure that they're being able to be fed during times like this. It's my duty that, you know, Nike is gonna be able to eat. The owner of Nike is gonna be able to eat at the end of the day. But I know that me putting my money into the pockets of people who are now opening their businesses because they've lost their jobs is gonna be able to, you know, put food on their table for their family and everything, or just put it in their pockets where they need it.
So answer, yes, I think that it will definitely make an impact. You know, again, this isn't a new concept. This is part of Black nationalism that was talked about, again, after Reconstruction, out of necessary, that was necessary. You know, W.E.B. Du Bois and Marcus Garvey talked about buying Black. This is how you create, you know, sort of Black Wall Street, excuse me. Sorry, phone ringing. But, you know, there are examples, you know, most recently in celebration of Juneteenth, there was a young entrepreneur, Keisha Williams was her name, started this movement called My Black Receipt. And, you know, this was something that went viral online, and she created a platform online that mobilized consumers to buy Black in just 3 days, spent over $500,000, right? And again, this is our buying power in play. People are seeing it. And, you know, to Armani's point, right, I think, you know, understanding the power and the strength of our dollar will make people stand up and take notice while supporting a friend or your community or a cause. But, you know, in a country that is dominated by capitalism, sometimes it's the dollar that makes people stand up, right? Even folks in the street, people protesting and rioting, right? It's about what this does to the economy that then turns heads. So the answer to your question, absolutely. How do we collectively use our money to benefit our communities, prove a point, and invest in ourselves, because ownership is the key.
I think that's a great point, and I think we've all been trying to do that. One of the thoughts I have of actually doing an MBA now and sitting in my economics class and wondering feeling like, and I also felt like I don't know what I've been taught in the rest of my life. I'm like, this is, you know, all of a sudden I felt smart because it was just such basic things. But when you talk about like capitalism and the way that like our economy is structured, you know, there's buy Black, but we also have to go back to the foundation of teaching people how to budget and be fiscally responsible and valuing things, because when you buy from a small business, that's going to be more expensive than necessarily if you go to Target, right? So you have to be able to look and budget and know you can't have 10 sneakers, you know what I mean? You can have one, or you can't have 10 watches, you can have one, because you're trying to, so it just comes to that, unless, I mean, if you can afford it, you can do whatever you want. But when if you're just gonna compare dollars and cents and say, well, yeah, I wanna support this Black business, but you know, their eyeshadow is, you know, $30 more than, you know what I mean? I know it's handmade, but I can get so much more in Sephora. So I think also going back to, you know, restructuring the way that we think about our money and spending and wealth and value and how we look at each other and what we wear and how we present. And that takes a lot of changing in our mindsets so that it becomes easier for our larger communities to sort of buy into, you know, supporting small businesses, Black-owned businesses.
Thank you. That's well said. I hope that this country sees a reconceptualization of entrepreneurship that is community oriented, that is focused on sustainability, and that is justice oriented. And may we all play a part in that. Thank you all again for this conversation today. Thank you for the panelists, Fred, Candice, and Melva and Armani, who stayed on. And thank you all who lingered on, asked your questions, and listened. This has been wonderful. Let's keep on with the action. Much love to you all. Stay safe. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.